Okay, today we're excited to welcome Ling-Ling Nie, a distinguished legal and compliance leader with a career spanning major corporate, government, and academic institutions. Ling-Ling is the founder and CEO of Tender Cosmetics, and most recently she served as Chief Legal Officer, General Counsel, and Secretary at Aura. She has also held key legal and compliance roles at the Georgia Institute of Technology, Panasonic North America, and the U.S. Department of the Treasury. In this conversation, we'll explore how general counsels lead and operate across different industries and organizations, the role of business acumen and relationship building in legal leadership, and Ling-Ling's personal entrepreneurial journey as the founder of Tender Cosmetics. From high-stakes legal strategy to the evolving importance of wellness and demanding careers, this episode is packed with insights for legal professionals and business leaders alike. Ling-Ling, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
So let's start out with what you're doing now. I know you have an exciting change in your journey. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, I just left my role at Aura last week to focus full time on my business, Tender Cosmetics. This is a beauty brand that I started almost 3 years ago and have been working on sort of on the side, on the evenings, on the weekends. And, at some point you have to make a decision about, the quality of the time you're spending on your side hustle and when is the right time to really put that into full focus. And so once the products were ready for sale, late last year, the company definitely went into a higher gear in terms of preparation for going live and launching, and it was just a lot to handle. So I thought the time was right. There were lots of tailwinds, leading me to the decision to spend some time focusing on the business and seeing how much I can grow it over the next few months. I don't think that the chapter of my life as an in-house lawyer feels finished, and so I think there probably will be more to come there on that side. But for at least the next few months, I'm very excited about what I can do with this company with sort of 100% of my focus on it.
Yeah, that's really, really exciting. So tell us a little bit about your legal backgrounds. And you're now a wearer of many hats at Tender, but tell us a little bit about your legal experience.
Sure. I mean, I don't think I'm unique in the sense that I really had no idea what type of lawyer I wanted to be, when I went to law school and even upon graduation. I thought at some point during my law school career, it would dawn on me what kind of lawyer I wanted to be, but it was even less clear once I graduated. So the early part of my career was really process of elimination. And I confess I partied a little bit too much in law school. I didn't have the best grades, and so there weren't sort of all sorts of opportunities open to me at the time. So it really was taking what was available and making the most of it and seeing if this is what fit me, most comfortably. I clerked for a year out of law school, and in Virginia, where I clerked, that's a 1 to 2 year job. In other states, it's kind of a full-time position, but in Virginia, it is sort of a doorway to the rest of your career. So I did that for a year and then became a civil litigation associate at a very small firm. I handled mainly medical malpractice cases and divorces, and left after 8 months because that was definitely not it for me. I really admire people who do that work. It's very emotional. And if you don't care for your mental health, it can have quite a bit of negative impacts, but it's important work, and I really admire people who do that. But it just wasn't my cup of tea. So at the time, a lot of my law school classmates had moved to DC to work for the federal government. So I thought, maybe that's the right fit for me. And I just literally went on usajobs.gov and applied for every single position that was looking for entry-level lawyers. And I got a job at the United States Mint, which is a bureau of the U.S. Department of the Treasury. And basically, it's a manufacturing operation that makes our nation's coinage. And it's one of the very few government agencies that actually makes money for the government, because there's a difference in the value of the coins and the cost to produce them. And that sort of profit is sent back to the Treasury. So in many ways, it was like working for a manufacturing company, but it was just owned by the government. And it was a fascinating experience. And after a couple years there, I moved into Main Treasury, which is the larger building next to the White House, and you're focused more on sort of policy. And this was right after the financial crisis. And so I worked quite a bit on Dodd-Frank implementation. which again was just a really historic time, to be in that building. I had a wonderful experience there. But then just sort of naturally, I became very curious about all of these regulations that we were drafting and publishing. What is it like for those who have to comply? What is it like for the companies who have to comply? So that's where I sort of got this idea that maybe I want to try being an in-house lawyer. So I went kind of back to my methodology for looking for a job, and I just applied to everything that I could. Um, and very fortunately, got a job with Panasonic's automotive division, which is based in Georgia, and that also allowed me to return back to Georgia, which is where I grew up mostly. So that was a really nice convergence of events, and basically built a compliance program because I had just experienced some antitrust issues, and it really was working in compliance that made me feel at home. And I think it's because it's not a pure legal practice. There's so many aspects of compliance that involve really having a very good understanding of business, of operations, of finance. It's a marketing endeavor. It's a culture endeavor. There's so many pieces beyond pure legal advice. That I think I have a lot more strengths in. And so sort of marrying that with the law ended up being a really good spot for me. And that's where I focused a lot of my career since then. I was able to become the chief compliance officer at Panasonic eventually. And then from there, um, thought maybe I would try being a general counsel. That's not something I'd ever contemplated in my mind. Every general counsel I knew at that point had an Ivy League pedigree and had gone to or had worked at a very large law firm in one of the bigger cities in our world, and that just wasn't my background. So I just didn't think that was an option for me. But one of my most influential mentors said, just give it a shot. So I went to a bunch of panels of general counsels to kind of learn what that job entails. And just by luck was managed to get a job at Georgia Tech, who happened to be looking for a legal executive who was not from higher education. They really wanted someone at the time came from the outside to build them what they were looking for, which was a legal department, a compliance department that looked like what you would see at one of the major corporations. So it seemed like a really great opportunity because they were willing to make the investment. And that's always very key when you're looking for new roles is you want all of these things, but you're going to give me $1 to do it. It's kind of impossible, but you're actually going to take it seriously and fund a world-class high performing team. I'm all about that. Let's do that. So it was incredibly enjoyable, very gratifying. I met so many amazing, talented people that I would never have come across had I not walked into higher ed. And then after that, one of my prior bosses called to say that he was joining a startup company and would I want to come with him to help build that out on the legal side. And it was an absolute yes, not only because I enjoy working with him, but it was a new and different environment. And that's what I tend to gravitate towards. If I look at my career, there's no sort of, common industry or sort of common themes. I like things that are difficult and I like things that are different. And that community seemed to check those boxes. And I would say the last 3 years at Aura have been highly transformative. There's a certain freedom, at a startup company where, the best idea wins. And so everyone is bringing their best ideas to the table. And from a legal perspective, you do have to make sure you are paying attention because oftentimes you find yourself sort of chasing the train because it's already left the station. But that's very exhilarating. And so part of that energy is what honestly inspired me to start my company when I was working at Aura, because everybody seemed to have something on the side because there's just so much curiosity, there's so much talent, and a lot of people were very skilled beyond the four corners of the job that they were doing within the company. So it was a very influential, transformative experience for me that's kind of led me to where I am now.
Yeah, that's terrific. I mean, it's your experience is I think in some ways uniquely general in that you have a lot of variety in terms of practice of area of law, industry, And so I'm sure that's equipped you to be an effective generalist. How do you think that, not necessarily specializing in a particular area of law or industry over the course of your career, how has that made you a better lawyer?
I mean, if I have a specialty, it would be in the compliance space,
Yeah.
because that's what I've spent most of my career doing. I think compliance attorneys are uniquely positioned to understand the business in a much deeper way than most in-house lawyers. And I say that because not only do we have to advise on what laws must be complied with, and what
Hmm.
company values must be complied with, we have to find a way to actually implement that within the organization. So it does require quite a deep
Yeah.
understanding of how the company actually operates and where
Yeah.
are the gating mechanisms and where are the points of failure that we have to make sure we're thinking about when we implement different controls and policies. And so, you know, I feel like being a compliance attorney has helped me understand the plumbing of an organization. And that
Yeah.
was helpful when I stood up my own company to make sure I was structuring it correctly and
Yeah.
looking for all the places where things can tend to go wrong. But having that expertise, I think, and understanding how the business operates has been a huge asset in moving sort of into a GC role, because I don't know if law schools really teach students who want to be in-house counsel how important it is to have that business acumen and that
Yeah.
financial fluency. They're absolutely, absolutely necessary if you want to be an
Yeah.
A player as an in-house lawyer.
Yeah. So, I know this is Ivory GC. We talk about, the roles of general counsel, but I'd really be interested to hear what you've had to do to set up Tender Cosmetics, and how your experience as a lawyer equipped you to really to start a new company that required much more than just compliance or a legal strategy, but also a business strategy. Can you talk a little bit about how your skill set as a legal professional has put you in a good position to succeed as a business entrepreneur?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Just my understanding of corporate governance has been an asset
Yeah.
in sort of
Yeah.
standing up the nuts and bolts of, becoming an LLC. There's paperwork that has to be filed,
Yeah.
and having some comfort and familiarity with that process, I think, has definitely been an advantage. I think there are so many amazing ideas out there, and what has been a barrier for most people in bringing that forward to the market is just the intimidation of,
Yeah.
how you actually do that from a legal perspective. So it was definitely helpful to sort of know and be able to have a good understanding of what that looks like. So that certainly was an advantage. And I think also being very aware of consumer psychology has been very helpful in
Hmm.
building my business, and particularly at Aura, which is a consumer business. I mean, there are other sales channels as well, but they do have a very prominent D2C channel. Has been extraordinarily educational, because you sit in the rooms with the marketing team who are experts at trying to understand consumer sentiment and consumer behavior, especially with respect to online activity and what really
Yeah.
draws the attention of a consumer.
Yeah.
That's been really helpful for me in designing, my sales and marketing strategy, the look and the feel of the website, my social media strategy. All of
Yeah.
that is informed by just the last 3 years of understanding how all of that works at a very direct way. I'm not
Yeah.
learning it from a book. I'm actually in the rooms where these things are being spoken about. So it's been really fascinating.
It's interesting. I mean, we have similarities in that, starting Ivory 3 years ago, a little over that now. It was really a combination of the experiences that I had as a lawyer, what I observed at the companies where I worked. It all kind of influenced how what Ivory looks like today. And so you almost have no choice but to take from your prior experiences. But it's incredible if you can surround yourself with good people, with good businesses, good practices. You soak that up, and it shapes how you build the next thing. Which for you is Tender Cosmetics. It's really really exciting. I like we've talked about. I'm really excited for you, and hope you. I'm sure you'll go on to do very good things with the brand. So,
Thank you.
um,
Thank you. But I think also you might understand this too. It's interesting how your risk tolerance changes when you own your own business versus
yeah,
when you're in-house and you're counseling,
yes,
your clients. And so that has
yes,
also been a change for me that was probably influenced by my time at a startup company. Because, at a
yeah,
startup, you're chasing revenue and you need to do what you need to do to bring in the business. And sometimes that means taking really big swings.
yeah,
And those aren't necessarily swings that would have been taken at a more traditional established company, because of the bureaucracy and the lower risk tolerance. So having that flexibility in how I view risk is something that I learned tremendously at Aura, and that's helped me a lot in my business.
yeah. I mean, I remember. I'm still experiencing to this day as a business owner, when I'm thinking, owner of Ivory Law Group, you look at things in a different way than if I were the attorney for Ivory Law Group. And so
Yes.
it's like now I've got to sign this contract as a business owner, but I'm reviewing it kind of as a as a lawyer, but it gives additional context. Like this is a $2,000 contract for over the next 12 months. I mean, maybe I'll look at it. It's just there's when you have the business context, like what this really means for the business, it informs really. I think it's made me a better lawyer to be
Yeah.
a business person because I understand the context within Ivory Law Group, kind of where this contract fits and where
Yeah.
like how important or unimportant it is in the grand scheme of things, where the risk really is, what I need to make sure this contract absolutely has to have XYZ. But other than that, as long as it doesn't have ABC, I'm okay.
Right.
So, it's
Right.
it just seeing things from that perspective, which you are with Tender, and which you have over the course of your career, but it does make you a better lawyer, and that's one of the themes that comes up in these episodes all the time. Is the more you can relate to the business, people get a better feel for the business, the better lawyer you become.
100%. Absolutely agree.
So you've worked across corporate, academic, and government sectors. What would you say some of the biggest differences and similarities in how a general counsel leads and operates in these environments?
Well, when I think about leadership, I think about it in two ways. I think about, on the one hand, being a leader of people. And there are nuances there, being a leader of people versus being a leader of leaders, depending on how large your organization, is. And then you have being a leader of the business or being a leader in the business. And those are two, I think, very equally important components of leadership, no matter what industry or what environment you're in. But I think what's really important, regardless of where you're working, is understanding how that business makes decisions. How
Hmm.
is the sausage made is,
Yeah.
is is the expression, because it's different everywhere, and you do need to flex your style to accommodate that. So, at Panasonic, a very Japanese company, decisions are made very much consensus based. That's the way they operate. Um, Unilateral decisions are not really favored because of the culture and just the history of how that company works. Very similar at Georgia Tech and very similar at public universities, that decisions are made on a consensus-based methodology. Obviously at Aura, that's not the flavor. They don't make decisions in that sort of manner because of the nature of how quickly things are changing and moving.
Yeah.
But once you can understand how a company or an organization makes decisions, you can then identify the different communication channels that are at your fingertips to be able to get the message across when you have to communicate something important. But the burden really is on you to find those inroads. So I think regardless of what environment you're working on, really examine how that company makes decisions, and also who is the most influential in those decisions.
Yeah.
Those are all important, criteria when you try to figure out how can I be effective. Because you can be obviously the most brilliant a lawyer in an organization, but if you can't effectively communicate, you're basically kind of a failure in the organization. But the burden is on you to figure that out. It's not on the organization to make it clear to you.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. So at Georgia Tech, you handled high-profile legal issues, including NCAA hearings and data breaches. What were some key lessons you learned from managing legal challenges in a public institution?
I think what's unique about public universities is what drives their risk profile is not revenue, which is what you would typically
Hmm.
see in a
Hmm.
profit corporation, but it's a reputation. Public perception is critical, for universities because there's such a whole ecosystem of people that are invested in the success of a university. It's not just the current students and the faculty and the staff working there. There's
Yeah,
a very large alumni group. There's
yeah,
a huge donor group. You have politicians and legislators who also have a vested interest in, the decisions that that public university is making. So that was a very interesting um, perspective that I guess I hadn't really appreciated until I actually was in the role. That we're really making sure that reputationally, we are making decisions that aren't going to impact the way the public perceives us. And there will be people who will be unhappy from time to time because of the nature of academia. But always having that in the forefront of your mind was something that was very critical to being successful in that role. I also think that you need a great deal of courage because there is so much scrutiny on the decisions that you're making. When
mm,
there is a crisis, like a data breach, or I guess more relevant to everyone, COVID. When COVID happened, everyone had to scramble to figure out how to get students out of the dorms and into a safer location, and how do we pivot from in-class instruction into remote instruction. So when you're responding to a crisis, you're doing it in real time. It's
hmm,
so comfortable to be able to watch a documentary and see, from a hindsight's point of view, how decisions were made and criticized. But at the moment
hmm,
you're making those decisions, you only have the information that's available.
hmm,
So you have to
hmm.
get very comfortable with making the best decision you can at that moment. And I think what helps is communication and communicating frequently. So when I was at Georgia Tech, we had a head of communications who was just outstanding. Her name's Renee Kopkowski. She's now at Yale, but she had a background in doing PR and communications for hospitals. And she was telling me and the executive team that communicating frequently about what you know and what you don't know will foster,
Mm,
transparency and will foster trust so that as a crisis is unfolding, you're going to receive less criticism if you are actually being very transparent about what you know and what you don't know, because people
yeah,
just want to know what the current status is. And even if it hasn't changed an hour from now, go ahead and say that. But having those touch points really helps you manage through a crisis um, without having a crushing wave of negative public sentiment. But instead, you have a public that's very understanding about what you're going through and actually can be quite supportive. So that's another, lesson learned. Um, and also perspective is important too. There's a huge amount of emotional stress involved when you're in these roles during, very significant periods of time where, nobody knows what's up and down. So having perspective is important, and knowing that, you know, I, one person I know told me, we're not soldiers or surgeons as lawyers, and so perspective is important. Knowing it's not the end of the world. You're working through a problem, and at the end of the day,
yeah,
everything will be fine. So take care of your health as well as you're trying to take
yeah,
care of others too.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and that will naturally enable you to be a better lawyer, better at your job if you're comprehensively taking care of yourself.
Absolutely.
The top, second to none in terms of priorities, at least in my book.
Yeah.
You emphasize the importance of relationship building across functions. How do you think legal teams can strengthen their partnerships with the business executives and business units?
I think I think maybe the most unhelpful lawyers are the ones that just identify all the problems. We all know
Yes.
lawyers who are like that. I think to really build a relationship with the business requires you to show value. And so what I've told my team, at the various places I've worked is that you don't just identify the legal hurdles. You also provide the solution. You give them the
Mm-hmm.
options and you give them
Mm-hmm.
options. And then you also actually help them execute those options. Um, so people in the past have told me that I hire well, and that's a nice thing to hear. But I've also made some mistakes. And I was thinking earlier today, when I think about the ones that didn't end up working out, a lot of the time it was because they were missing that execution piece. They
Oh,
were
interesting.
brilliant, brilliant, legal, um, subject matter experts. And they knew the law inside and out. They knew what was coming and what changes we could expect, and understood very well about sort of where this particular space was evolving. But you have to do more than that. You provide excellent advice and you have to provide excellent execution of that
Yeah.
advice. You don't just opine and then fold your arms and say, off you go. Um, you don't want your in-house legal team to be the sort of Q&A help desk where the business
Yeah.
comes, talks to you, and then runs off to their corner to execute. You actually need to be in the corner with them when they execute and tell them, no, maybe try it this way, try it that way. That's how you deliver value to the business. If they feel that you're actually going to be in the trenches with them rather than sort of lording over them with advice and then telling them all the things they're doing wrong, that's not going to be that's not going to make for a good relationship.
Yeah. So what do you keep in mind when it comes to executing on the advice that you're giving to the business? How do you approach that? What are some of the considerations? What kind of walk us through what your thought process is when it comes to that phase of counseling?
Yeah. Well, you can't do it if you don't know the environment. So it's very important. Again, the burden is on you to learn the business. I'm not saying,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm meaning at a macro level too. You have to understand the industry, the economic headwinds and tailwinds, who your competitors are. You
Yeah.
definitely have to know that. That's a given. But what about the company itself? Do you know what enterprise software systems they utilize? Do you know typically how those systems interact or don't interact with other systems? Like knowing the environment in the same way your business colleagues know the environment is going to make you a much more um, valuable resource. Because
Yeah.
when you then opine on how to execute, you're not putting ideas out there that are just not going to work, and they're going to be telling you, well, that's because this doesn't work, that doesn't work, and you obviously look already misinformed. So have a very firm understanding of the actual environment in which that company operates so that when you actually propose a solution, it's a workable solution. And there may be some details that you don't know because you're not a specialist, but having a strong sense of the large levers and the buttons that are accessible to that company will help you make a much more viable, pitch in terms of how
Yeah.
you want to solve this problem.
Yeah. With the increasing focus on cross-functional collaboration, what role do you think legal teams play in driving company culture and ethics?
Central, very central
Yeah.
role. Um, I mean, I think you know this, and lots of other lawyers know this, but oftentimes legal is kind of that moral compass of the business because of the nature of our jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And the way you influence culture and ethics is being visible. You know, show
Mm-hmm.
show up in the rooms where decisions are being made. If you're not invited,
Yeah.
invite yourself. You need to be there. It's a lot more challenging depending upon the type of workforce, like location strategy your company has implemented. Obviously pre-COVID, when most people were in an office, many times I felt just being in the building and passing through the cafeteria, I became like a walking reminder of culture and compliance and sort of doing the right thing. But then when you move to a remote environment, and Aura's culture workforce location strategy rather is remote plus. So everybody works wherever, and then we have a headquarters in Boston where we come together intentionally for collaboration, but everyone pretty much works from home. Those opportunities are not available for me to, again, I'm not coming to your house and walk around your living room to remind you about compliance and ethics. So you have to find other ways. But
Yeah.
certainly is,
Yeah.
again, the responsibility of the legal and compliance functions to find those ways to make sure we're being effective in communicating the right culture and the ethical sort of importance of doing things the right way.
So how has your approach to leadership evolved throughout your career? And what qualities do you believe are essential for a successful GC today?
Huh. Ooh, it's a great question. So I think it's interesting when I think back to what I thought a leader was. I think I had this perception as a kid, just from what you see on TV, that it's always going to be like the loudest person in the room who
Yeah.
loves being center of attention. That's what a leader is. And then you grow up and you start working and you see just how different leaders can be and how the most effective ones are not, what you thought were the most effective leaders.
Yeah.
They aren't in these roles for the glory or because they want
Yeah.
to be the sun around which everyone orbits.
Yeah.
They do it for the impact they can have on others, because you definitely, as you rise up the ranks, have greater access to people, to resources, to opportunities. And that's really become what I believe to be the purpose of leadership.
Yeah.
It's being in a position to help other people, being that servant leader. So I
Yeah.
think at this point in my career, for me, that's why leadership roles are of interest. That's why they appeal to me. It's really, how can
Yeah.
I help other people if I'm in this role? What dots can I connect? What, meetings can I help coordinate so that other people can achieve, whatever they're setting out to achieve?
Yeah, I'm reading "Turn the Ship Around" by David Marquette. He was a naval nuclear submarine commander, and he talks about transitioning from a leader-follower model, which is lead from the top, people who are you supervise just carry out what the leadership direction is, and instead moving to a leader-leader structure where the rank and file are learn to become leaders themselves. And
Yes.
so on his submarine, he would have his reports coming up to him and saying, "This is what I intend to do." And his response, you shoot for a agreed or a very well from your superior, and I think it really helps. At least it's something that I'm trying to implement at Ivory. Come to me with something that you can propose that is like I can say yes to, and then you just say, and and we try to do that with our clients too, as we're working with general counsels or the business folks. Propose something that can be easily just agreed. That's kind of what we shoot for when we correspond with our general counsel clients. Is that this is what we think we should do. This is why. This is what we've done to get us to this point. That's kind of implementing that leader type of a structure, which has changed the way I've thought about leadership a bit recently. So it resonates. And what you said about empowering people and giving and not necessarily being the center of the one driving the decisions, but empowering people around you to drive the decisions as well is it's an interesting approach to leadership.
Well, you should want that. You should want to hire people who are smarter than you. You should
Yeah,
want to hire
yeah,
problem solvers. And where that becomes an issue is if there's some insecurity in the leader's, in the leader's mind about what that means for them.
yeah,
Um, but you gotta get over that. You
yeah,
are only as good as your team. And
yeah,
so if you're not hiring, A players, what
yeah,
does that say about you? So you've got to get comfortable with hiring people who are absolutely brilliant, who are going to solve problems very
yeah,
easily.
yeah. So as we start wrapping up, what advice would you give to a junior lawyer who was aspiring to be somewhere where you are today? What advice do you have to offer that person?
Well, I would say even if you didn't make good grades in law school, there's still hope for you because, your career is what you make it.
Yeah,
Be defined by whatever grades you had, or if you started out your career in a place that you were really thinking was going to be the best opportunity. You are in charge of your career. You're sitting in the driver's seat of your life,
yeah,
and you still make very good decisions that will put you on a path to success. So I think always having that optimism is really key. But I think across the board, I do think successful people in general have a very high standard of performance. And there are some key behaviors that drive that. One of them I think is what I call follow through, that you give them the ball and they take it across, the finish
hmm,
line every single time without needing any prompting or reminding.
yeah,
And they do what they say, that's follow through. And then the second is consistency. So that's something that you can count on them to do every
yeah,
time. It's not like they're like that half the year and the other half of the year they're not quite up to that standard. But being consistent is another sort of behavior I think that is common in successful people. Um, I also think there's just no substitute for just good old-fashioned hard work, grit and perseverance. When you run into a wall, you find another way. And it may take several tries, but you figure it out quickly. And so I think that's particularly true for success as an entrepreneur, because you're the one flying the plane. And especially if you're a solo entrepreneur, nothing happens if you don't set the wheels in motion. So you have to be almost obsessed with moving the ball forward no matter what, as you know, in your role as well. And then I think if you're working in an organization where you have a boss, I think strategic allocation of your time and your effort is what you should be thinking about, because obviously early in your career, you are relying on other people to advance you. And so for me, what I would do early in my career, I would ask myself, what is going to make my boss's life easier and what's going to make them look good? And that would sort of guide me in the way I did my job. So I would do my job the best that I could at a very, very high standard. And I would try to learn what keeps my boss up at night and try to help them, figure out those problems without them having to ask me to do that. I would just always have in the forefront of my mind, or these are the things that stress them out. And when I solve this problem, I'm going to make sure I address that as well. So it's just being very thoughtful about, doing the best job you can in the role you have, and making those around you who are on your team feel like you have their back.
Yeah, I really like that. There's so many opportunities in this career and others to learn as you go. And you really are. I really like the sentiment of building your career, building the plane as you're flying it, building your career as you're progressing. And I love when people come on and share those experiences, those lessons learned. It's been great to have you on. I wish you all the best. I may not be a consumer of Tender Cosmetics, but I will certainly be an advocate, and wish you all the best. It's been a real joy to get to know you, and sure big things are on the horizon for Tender.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.